So, without taking more of your time, now it is time to inaugurate our lecture series. And for that, I'm going to invite Mr. Nelson, the Cultural Attaché of the American Embassy in Kuwait, to introduce tonight's speaker. Nelson.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Dr. Zaid, and the Rice Center, and everyone at AUK for hosting us tonight. So my name is Nelson Nguyen. I'm the Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy. And I'd just like to tell a little bit about some of our programs before we start tonight and the reason why we brought our speaker here tonight. So at the Public Affairs section of the U.S. Embassy, we really focus on people-to-people exchanges. We try to bring visitors from the U.S. of all different types to here to Kuwait to meet with students, with academics, with government officials, business people in different fields. So we brought everyone from a NASA engineer who worked on the Mars rover project to air quality experts to health experts, musicians and performers. And if you're interested, you can check our Instagram, which is US Embassy Kuwait, to find out more about our events. Actually, next Tuesday at 2:30 in this auditorium, we're going to have the US Air Force Band perform. If you've ever seen them perform, they're a lot of fun. They do a high-energy show of rock and pop music, so we hope to see you there. All of this week, we've actually got Discover America Week events, so different cultural events, events related to American products and brands at different places, so check out our Instagram for the whole schedule for that. Regarding tonight's events, we're really excited to have with us Mr. Guillermo Christensen. This topic of cybersecurity, which he's going to talk about, is really an essential topic no matter what field you choose to go into. And the issues of data privacy and data security permeates everything we want to do these days. So I'm really excited to see such a big group of AUK students that are interested. This is definitely going to be a challenge that we have to grapple with no matter what field you want to go into. So Mr. Christensen is currently a partner at the law firm of Ice Miller in Washington, D.C. He comes with a very illustrious background in the field of cybersecurity, having worked at everywhere from the CIA as an intelligence officer to the State Departments and at various law firms in the United States. And I've had the privilege really of seeing a lot of his presentations and being in his meetings over the past week with different government officials, different universities, businesses. And I have to say, what you're going to see tonight is really special because it's eye-opening, it's fascinating, and we hope this is the start of a really productive discussion. So after this presentation, we hope you stick around for the Q&A and really this is your chance to ask any questions you might have about the field of cybersecurity because it's a very exciting and challenging topic. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest, Mr. Guillermo Christensen.
So let me just tell you, for someone who used to work as an intelligence officer, having that many photographs taken of you is a little bit of an odd experience. But anyway, thank you all very much for inviting me to speak today. Thank you to the Embassy for arranging this wonderful program and for the university to host me. There's one comment I wanted to make about the hackathon. A real hackathon needs to have a lot of Red Bull and pizza. If you ever go to see hackers, they drink a lot of Monster, but you have to have a lot of energy drinks and a lot of pizza. I don't know why, but every hacker I know, when they're in the middle of a hack, has pizzas and Red Bulls. So just put that on your list, your ingredients for the next one. So what I'm going to talk about today is a subject that is, we're not going to get very technical. So if you came here to figure out how to hack into the university systems to change your grades, I can't help you there. But what I want to do is I want to give you some background, some history to put into context what's going on the global geopolitical sphere as far as hacking, and something that impacts all of us, and it impacts countries like Kuwait just as much as it impacts the United States, or European countries. So for that, I'm going to give you a little bit of perspective. So the first thing I want you to know a little bit about me is how I work, so you put this into context. So that red line is what I would describe as my business model, now as a lawyer, but also when I was doing this in the government. It's something we call left of boom and right of boom. So left of boom, and I have it in green, is where things are very easy, they're very cheap, relatively speaking, and they're low stress. This is when you prepare for something bad to happen. And the better prepared you are, the less bad the situation will be when you have boom. Boom could be any kind of emergency. In this context, it is usually hackers who are breaking into your system. And after they break into your system, we're into right of boom, which is very high stress, expensive, dangerous, might even cause harm, death, in the cyber world. So my preference is to spend as much time on the left and as little on the right. However, human nature doesn't usually like to prepare, likes to wait until the last moment, and so we end up on the right side far too often. I also wanted to introduce you to my team. This is a team of lawyers that I have working with me in the United States. It's a wonderful team. One of the amazing things about this team is everybody on this team is technically proficient in internet and technology. Some of them used to be network engineers. Some of them used to work as security officers in internet companies. So, for those of you who have studied your Latin, you'll know what this means. For those who haven't, I have a little translation for you. In cyber world, this translates differently. This translates into, if you don't want to get hacked, think like a hacker. I'm curious, who here would consider themselves to be a hacker and is willing to put up his or her hand to acknowledge that? Good, that's smart. Keep that to yourself. So, some of the ideas behind what I'm going to tell you today and why this matters. So the first thing is, cybersecurity really comes out of the world of the military and espionage. Long before there was an internet, and I'm going to show you some examples, people were doing the things that we consider to be nation-state hacking. So my second point is, it helps to understand that history to put things into context today. And the other reason is, what is happening right now between nation-states, when you read in the newspapers about Russia hacking the elections in the United States, or North Korea stealing money from banks in Bangladesh, those same things end up moving into the world that we live in. So not the world of countries, but the world that we inhabit. The universities, hospitals, energy companies, Amazon, any of these companies are on the front lines of these threats. Put a different way, the next battlefield is going to start on the internet. I don't think there will be another war between two countries that doesn't begin with some kind of cyber activity. So that could be one country trying to hurt the other country's electricity grid, maybe taking down their energy system, maybe taking down all their communications. Or, as we've seen in the United States, countries spreading propaganda to confuse, to cause discord in the people. It's a very effective mechanism because it's hard to tell where it comes from, and these days it's more and more difficult to tell what's the truth and what's not the truth from all the information that we have. So Cybersecurity, 1914. Now I'm sure at this point you're thinking, 1914, there is no internet, there's definitely no emails. I wasn't around then, but I'm pretty sure there were no emails. So what am I talking about? So this, I would argue, is one of the first types of internet that we have. This is the first submarine cable that was put under the ocean between what we would call the Old World, Europe, the New World, North America, 1858, and it's a revolution in communications. Because unlike the radio, this could send a lot of information. And today, we have many, many submarine cables. And most of them, in fact, I think all of them now, are all fiber optic, which allows us to send enormous amounts of information through these cables. Most of you might think that in this crowd you probably understand that most internet does not come from satellites. It comes through fiber optic lines. This is the communication infrastructure that the whole world relies on. So, 1914, there was a ship much like this one in Canada waiting for instructions from the Royal Navy, from the Admiralty in London. And the instructions were, once they knew that war was going to begin between Germany and Britain, well, the whole of Europe at that point, the captain got an instruction to sail out into the ocean, drop the anchor, and drag it along the ocean floor. And when he did that, he cut the submarine cables that the Germans had. And so he cut off communications. This is one of the first examples that I would argue of using information warfare to deny the enemy the ability to communicate. It's much like we've seen, for example, in the Ukraine, where Russian hackers use DDoS attacks. This is where they flood your websites with so much data that you do not see any data. You can't use your information. Those are the submarine cables that are out there in the world today. There are quite a few of them, and they're not hard to find. In fact, we've had incidents around Japan and Asia where some of these cables have been cut by accident, and whole countries have gone dark on the internet until these submarine cables could be repaired. It's one of the reasons why, in a recent report, the conclusion was that this threat is nothing short of existential. In other words, if someone were out there determined to destroy these cables, they could cause a tremendous amount of damage. If we lost interconnectivity between these countries, banks wouldn't be able to communicate. Obviously, we wouldn't have email, but there are lots of other systems that rely on having connections all over the world, especially now with cloud computing, where we have data centers located all around the world. And part of the reason that is a good thing is that they're redundant. So you have a data center in Kuwait, but you might also have a data center in Bahrain or in Dubai. If I sever that, I only need to take down one data center and the whole thing stops working. So the concept of information warfare, this is essential to cybersecurity today. Anyone recognize what this is? This is an email from 1914, actually 1917. When you wanted to communicate back then, you had to go to a telegram office and you would write your message. And like Twitter, you would use as few characters as possible because they charged you by the letter. And you would send this telegram and they would send it by Morse code. I don't know if anyone here still learns Morse code, but it's a great thing to teach short, brief messages. This is the most famous telegram in history. They call it the Zimmermann telegram. Zimmermann was the foreign minister of Germany at the time. And this message was sent to the German legation, that's just another word for the German embassy in Mexico City, from Berlin. But it went via Galveston. Does anyone know where Galveston is?
Florida.
Close. Texas. Now, why would the Germans be sending a message from Berlin to Mexico City through Galveston? Maybe because their submarine cables had been cut, so they had to send it through a different route. And at the time, in Galveston, the British had an agreement to be able to copy all these messages as they were coming in. And the British had some excellent mathematicians who took the message, took those numbers, and figured out what they meant. They were a code. And I'll show you one in particular here. And I realize that may be a small word, but it's Krieg. It means war in German. What this message said, basically, was Germany wanted Mexico to join the war against the United States. A surprise attack. That's what that message translated as. So what did the British do with this? They sent it to the newspapers. This wasn't fake news, but very effective. I love this headline. Poor Foreign Minister Zimmermann didn't know that he was exposed by this. This telegram probably helped the United States to decide to join the war on the side of the Allies, so France and Britain, in 1917, and that changed the course of the war. So, information warfare can have a huge impact. Hacking someone's communications can have a huge impact. And where are we today? Exactly the same place. Only we can do it much more easily, much more quickly, and you can have an effect, and people do not even realize it. So, during the 2016 election, no one really realized that all these messages and these emails that were being leaked were coming from the Russians. It took a long time for that to come out. And they changed history. Whether they changed the election or not, I don't know, but they certainly changed a lot of the discussion around how things happen in that time period. And it was very cheap. It was very easy. And I'm going to show you how easy it was in a few. Another thing that I think history teaches about cybersecurity is it's not about technology. And if you're a hacker, you know this already. You know that technology is not what cybersecurity is all about. It's a tool, but it's not the essence. The essence is people. So, that machine there, I would say, is like the iPhone of 1941. Now, obviously, it's a little bit bigger, a little harder to carry around, it doesn't have a battery, so. But that's the way that you would communicate securely with encryption during World War II. It's a German Enigma machine. Brilliant piece of engineering. I would say the Germans are still some of the best engineers in the world, and they certainly were back then. You can see a German field marshal sending messages there during the war. The encryption on this was excellent. The Germans believed it was perfect. Lesson number 2, there is no perfect security. Anything that one person can create in security, another one will be able to figure out forever. If there's one thing I can guarantee you about this business, it's that. So, the Germans believed this machine was perfect. But there was a gentleman named Alan Turing, brilliant, brilliant man, mathematician, but also brilliant in many other ways. And he figured out that there were flaws in the way the machine encrypted messages. There were many other people who helped. For example, the reason I have that submarine picture up there is all German submarines carried one of these machines in there to receive the coded messages. And these would be the messages that would tell them, go to this part of the ocean, this is where the Allied ships would be, and you can attack them there. They would send this message encrypted because a submarine is protected by stealth, by no one else knowing where it is. If you know where it is, it's very easy to sink them. So one of the things that would happen whenever a British or American Navy ship would find one of these submarines and would try to sink it, as the submarine was sinking, there would be some poor sailor who would jump on board that submarine and try to get down into the control room to grab that machine and get it out before it sank. Just think of the bravery it takes to jump into a sinking submarine, an enemy sinking submarine. But that's how valuable getting one of these machines was, because once you had that machine, you had the codes for everything that had been sent for a long time, or getting the code books. And when you did, you were able to translate one of those messages, and you were able to then figure out where the next attack would be. And of course, if you know where the next attack would be, you have a big advantage in military terms. Another way in which information security is a powerful weapon is something we learned after World War II during the days after the first nuclear bombs were dropped. Has anybody ever seen one of these before? Okay. So, on the right is a walnut. You may have had those to eat sometime. But the reason it's there is, this is a Russian piece of spy equipment. We call it a one-time pad. Today, it is still one of the most secure ways to send messages. Because the message, you translate it, you encrypt it using that one piece of paper, and then you take that paper and you burn it, or you put it in the water and it dissolves. On the other side, there's someone with that same little book. They will decrypt it, and then they destroy that piece of paper. So it's never used again. It's a very, very secure mechanism. Mathematically, the reason it works is because the message is as long as the key, or the key is as long as the message, and that makes it very hard to break. But I said it's a one-time pad. During World War II, the Russians ran out of paper sometimes, so they would use these more than once. It's not a two-time pad, it's not a three-time pad. When you use it more than once or twice, you give someone like Alan Turing more examples of messages to be able to compare and in turn figure out how the encryption works. And it took a long time, it took many years after World War II, but eventually the United States was able to read the secret messages of the Russians for many years. That's what those messages look like. And because of that, the United States figured out how the Russians were able to test a nuclear bomb many, many years before anyone expected them to. Because there were spies, like the Rosenbergs, mainly Mr. Rosenberg. Mrs. Rosenberg probably wasn't a spy in the end. But they passed all the secrets of the Manhattan Project, which was the project that was joined between Britain and the United States to create the nuclear weapon. They passed all that to the Russians. The Russians then used that and were able to create a nuclear weapon much, much earlier. Again, this is a picture of the first Russian nuclear test. Another example of where information warfare and breaking and entering into an information system changes history. Because if the Russians hadn't gotten the information this way, they might not have had a nuclear weapon until maybe 1960 or 1970. And that would have been a very different world. I don't know if it's better or worse, but just different. So nation-state hackers. I call them the alpha predators because, just like in nature, they're the ones that sit at the top of the food chain. So you think of, in Africa, the lions, right? Those are the alpha predators, the peregrine falcon and the birds of prey. Well, nation-states, they've always been at the top, and they've been doing this for a very long time. This is a great quote from someone who works in protecting energy companies from complicated threats. And there are 3 words in this quote that really jump out at me when I'm thinking about high-end hacking. And they're words you will not find in most cybersecurity books. And they are logistics, planning, and operations. But you will find those words in every military doctrine and every military manual. Because complex operations always require logistics, so delivering things, planning, making sure you have the right approach on how to do things, and then operations, which are execution, carrying out the attack. This is a picture of a gentleman named Rob Joyce. At one point, he was the head for the top hackers at NSA. NSA, the National Security Agency, clearly one of the best at hacking and the best at cyber in the world. They realized a number of years ago that they needed to talk more about the defensive side of cybersecurity, and so he began to go to hacker conferences, and this is Defcon. If you haven't had a chance to go to Defcon, I highly recommend it, Black Hat on Defcon. It's in Las Vegas, but it's one place for 4 or 5 days where you will find between 20 to 40,000 hackers in one small place. If you go, please leave your cell phones, your laptops, your iPads, your watches behind. Do not take any of that stuff there because you will be surrounded by some of the best hackers in the world. But it is an incredible place, and you will see really amazing stuff happening in labs and around there. But anyway, he went there and he gave this very good talk that I thought was really, really brilliant. And he said, first of all, and this was advice to security people in companies, don't assume that a crack in your system, in your defense, is not going to be noticed. Now what he's saying there is, it doesn't matter that you've left open a very small hole in your perimeter defense, in your firewall. If it's there, we will find it. He says, all we need is that first seam, that first thin line between one wall and another. And we may just need to squeeze in there, and then your system has been compromised. This is also equally important. He says, we, meaning the hackers, we will put in the time to know your system better than the people who designed it and better than the people who are currently in charge of securing it. So your IT department, for example, in the university. If I have a team of hackers, by the end of the first part of their work, they will know that network incredibly well. And the other thing they will know is how the network actually works, as opposed to how people who operate it think it works. And that's a very big difference. Because when you design a system, when you do the architecture, you're thinking your ideas about how it actually works, but in fact you're going off a plan. They're going in there and actually testing, probing, surveying the network. And they're going to find things in there that you may have forgotten were in your system. When we do red teams, which is something that companies hire us to do, so we pretend to be hackers, the company hires us, we go in and we test the system, we find sometimes computers, servers, that the company doesn't realize they still have. And often those computers are full of very sensitive information, or it's a computer that is very old, hasn't been patched. Maybe it's using Windows 3.1, if anybody here ever had a Windows 3.1 machine. Maybe if they're lucky, it has Windows XP, right? Which takes all of about 10 seconds to break into these days. And that's the door. That's the magical door. And the reason this is important is because everyone in the security business suffers from overconfidence. Some people will tell you their system is 100% secure. They will be surprised at some point in time. So, there are probably hundreds of surveys like this. I just picked one out of many. So, and And these are, the respondents here are cybersecurity personnel, so CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers at companies, and they're asked, how soon, would you be able to detect something in your system, an intrusion, within 24 hours? And 75% of them said yes. The average for most companies is 200 days. Now, I'm a lawyer, so that by definition means I probably wasn't very good at math. It's not true, but 200 average means that there were some companies that probably had hackers in there for years, because we might find many of these within an hour or two. For every 1 2 hour one we found, someone didn't find them for years. And that happens a lot. Another question that I think is fascinating is that 78% thought that they could fix a vulnerability within 24 hours. That's impossible. The reason it's impossible, this is what it actually usually takes, is because when they say have a good patching program, I'm sure you've heard this, patch, unless you're talking about your iPhone or maybe one computer, anything complicated like the computer systems that run the university, if you patch something, you're probably going to break 10 other things when you do that. Because these systems are connected. And if I patch that server, there's probably 5 pieces of software that are much older that don't work with that patch. So in order to patch, I first have to go and patch all the other things. Maybe I have to buy new software. I might even have to buy new hardware. And I have to test it. And I'm sure the professors here would recognize this. You don't want to take the system down in the middle of the day when everybody's working, right? You have to wait until it's a weekend when people are not using it. So patching is not easy. So what does a nation-state attack look like? So the first thing is, more than anything else, they work in teams. They'll have a team of hackers that are good at breaking in. They'll have a team that's very good about doing the reconnaissance, so finding out information. Some of these are really good at using social media to figure out things like passwords. Like they will look at all the Facebook accounts of all the security people on your team, an IT team. Why? Because people love to use passwords that are the names of their children, their pets, the car they like, whatever it is. And sometimes you don't really need to do much other than look at their social media feed, and you will get all the information you need to get into that system. The best of the best are usually the ones who do the lateral movements and the exploits inside the network. Because once you've spent all that time breaking into a system, you want to stay there for as long as you can. And so, when you're moving inside that network, you need to do it very carefully so that you don't trip any alarms, any sensors. You don't somehow let someone realize that there's another unauthorized user in there. Sometimes you do this by mistake because as you're moving around, you're trying to collect information, you're collecting lots of data. What do you do with it? You find a shared drive somewhere on that system and you begin creating compressed files. And before long, you've got 5, 6 terabytes of data sitting there. One day, someone from IT notices that the drive is becoming up to, it's being filled up to capacity. They look in there and they discover you. So you have to make sure that you're distributing the stuff inside the network. It takes a lot of work. And one small mistake, and you build a big operation. So the goal for many of these nation-state hackers is to get in and stay in as long as possible. They are very patient. Sometimes they're in your system for 3 or 4 years. There are probably some hacks that have been going on for even longer and no one has found them yet. They're sophisticated, but I want to emphasize that doesn't mean that they use high tech. And I'm going to show you I think one of the most brilliant hacks that did not use high tech, but it worked extremely well. They definitely use what we call zero-day exploits. And if you haven't encountered that term yet, it's basically some flaw in a piece of software that no one has found yet. And for example, if you are doing research into 0 days for Apple, and you find one, there's a market for these. People are paying somewhere between $1 to $1.5 million for that flaw in that software that lets a hacker take over the phone. You may have read not very long ago that the WhatsApp app was discovered to have a flaw that allowed anyone to take over a phone, essentially, without giving away any indications that they were doing it. That was a 0-day exploit. And I used to say that one way you could tell the difference between a nation state and other hackers is that they were looking for different things. They weren't in there to steal money. But then the North Koreans came along and changed all this. And the North Koreans have been using their nation state hackers, and now the Iranians as well, to rob banks. That's the best way to put it. So North Korea mounted an operation against the bank, the National Bank of Bangladesh, mostly using not technology, but what I call social engineering. They learned how the people in the bank worked, and they sent a message to them on a Friday, because they knew nobody was going to be there during the weekend, and transferred $81 million. Actually, they tried to transfer much more than that. I think even close to $1 billion. But they got $81 million sent from the bank to a casino in Macau, where they cashed out their winnings and walked away. One weekend's worth of work, $81 million. Pretty good. So I'm going to pick on one country, and I'm sorry, it's not going to be the United States. I imagine you understand why. But one country, Russia, to talk about what a nation state looks like when they're hacking. And I would say the Russians are very, very good. They have a very long history. They have excellent engineers, and they've been using information warfare, I think, better and longer than almost anyone else in their history. I personally love this quote at the bottom there. That's from a hacker. It was an interview. And he says, basically, about half of the hackers, the good hackers in Russia, work with the government. And he's talking about criminal hackers. So this is a document from the Department of Justice that was made public, which explained what happened during the election in 2016 in the United States. And you may see there, I try to highlight this at the bottom there, but it says, starting in March of 2016, the conspirators, the Russians, targeted over 300 individuals in the political campaign of Hillary Clinton. You can tell our political campaigns have a lot of people in them. And that's actually not the whole number, but there's a lot of people in these. And so this is one of the things they did. They sent what we call spear phishing. So phishing is an email that you get that has a link in it that if you click on it, something bad happens. So I'm sure you've heard, don't click on links, which is great advice, but nobody ever follows it. I don't follow it. Everybody follows links because there's always something interesting there, right? But in this case, they sent these spear phishing emails to people that they knew could open up doors for them. And this is probably, I think, one of the most interesting and influential hacked emails so far in history. So the gentleman who received this email is a very well-known political consultant and was in the government, a guy named John Podesta. And he was working with the Hillary campaign. And he got this email in March of 2016. And I think for the money, this is one of the best written social engineered hack emails, phishing emails that I've ever seen. And I'll tell you why. First of all, big red, someone has your password, right? So when you see this, immediately you start feeling nervous. It's not a good feeling. And then it says, someone just used your password to try to sign into your account. Now, notice notice they didn't say that they did sign in. Because if they'd said they did sign in, then maybe he would have picked up the phone and called somebody and said, I have a problem, someone's in my emails. No, they said they tried, they didn't work. You have to love the Russian sense of humor. So if you're gonna get into trouble, you might as well blame your best friend or your worst enemy, right? And it says, Google stopped this. Yay for Google. But you should change your password immediately. Now let me just tell you, if your password worked so that it kept somebody out of your account, you don't need to change it. You only need to change it when it didn't work. But they give them this very nice button, go ahead and change your password, right? Now what happens when you hit that button? You get three things you need to fill out, right? Your current password and your new password. Well, they don't care about the new password. They're looking for the old password. As soon as he filled that out, they had his account. And Mr. Podesta was one of those people, I'm sure there are some in the audience, who keeps every message they ever got. And he had a lot. He had a lot of messages from him to Hillary Clinton and other people. So that was a bad thing. And they used those messages, plus others, to create confusion, to leak them. Now, how much would you say it would cost to prevent this kind of an attack from happening to you? $10,000? Zero. I love it. Multi-factor authentication? Very good. So, even well before this, years before this, Google had given you the option, and you have the option today, to have something called two-factor or multi-factor authentication. That means when you put in your password, you also have to put in another number, a random number that now you should generate on an application, not on a text message. If that had been in place here, this hack would not have worked. Because sure, they would have gotten his password, but then when they needed to put in that code, they wouldn't have had it. So multi-factor, this is my friendly take-home tip, should be on for every account you have. Bank accounts, social media, emails. If you don't have it, get it, turn it on. But it's not 100%. Because the hackers, as soon as people started using it, they began to figure out ways around it. But it's very hard to get around it. So do it. Make their life miserable, don't make things easy for them. So, if you're not one of these agencies, what do you do to protect yourself? Do you buy a lot of expensive security software? Do you stop using the internet? Some people do. No. I think there are things you should do, and they're simple things. But they're also hard things. Like in life, some things that are simple are also very difficult. So when the doctor says, don't eat sweets, or don't eat as many sweets, it's not as easy as it sounds. So, here are my list of top things you should think about doing. And this is not just for people, it's governments, it's companies, universities. So let's start with the first one. Keep it simple, stupid, relative. And what do I mean by that? So, keeping it simple means avoiding complexity. And complexity in many things in life, but especially in networks and information, is your enemy. Because complexity makes it easy for you to have these gaps between systems. Maybe you have two firewalls, which is a really bad idea, but I see it all the time. Those two firewalls actually work against each other. Or some people have two antivirus systems running at the same time, and they're working against each other. Or while they're conflicting, they're opening up a door. Complexity also helps the attacker, when they get inside, to hide. Because the system is not easy to see. It's hard to track where the traffic is. You can't monitor it the same way that you can with a simpler, easier to understand system. This is also important in this day and age when more and more of these hacks aren't about taking information, they're about destroying a system by bringing down a network. The more complicated the system is, the more places there are where you might be able to take down one small piece and it actually causes the whole system to go down. And when you're talking about things like ransomware, this is especially the case because ransomware begins to impact system reliability and causes things to start cascading and failing. And complexity also makes it hard to bring the system back online after you've discovered that you've been hacked and you try to bring it back online. If you've ever had to do a full system restore on a set of backup tapes from 1982, you know that that's practically impossible. So it's, again, simple, or as simple as you can make it is better. And in my business, what I spend a lot of time trying to define is exactly that. How simple can we make it before it doesn't work for the client, or before we make it too easy for the hackers? And that's the reasonable security, which is, anytime you see the word reasonable, you should be thinking there's probably a lawyer involved. Supply chain. The weakest links. So, you may have heard of a company called Target in the United States. Very big shopping company, lots and lots of employees. They had a very large hack. Their security was pretty good. The hackers didn't come through their system. They found the people who ran their heating and air conditioning system. And they used that as the entry point. Why? Well, a heating and air conditioning company doesn't care about cybersecurity. Why would they? What could possibly matter in that respect? However, if that heating and air conditioning company has a direct electronic connection to their big clients so that they can build them electronically and monitor their systems, that's just another entry path into their network, one that isn't protected. And that's how they got in. So, if you have vendors and third parties, or at home, my son, for example, he's one of the danger points, right? You have to be as careful with them as what you do. Because you might spend a lot of money to have a great security system, you might have a great security team, and then the people who deliver the water or who do something that you didn't think has anything to do with cybersecurity are the ones opening the door to the bad guys. Another reason why supply chain is very difficult to do is it combines risks with hardware and software. So we've seen a lot of people talking now about how people are intercepting equipment, like servers, and putting pieces of hardware in them that allows that server to communicate back to someone else and bypasses all the security. That's very hard to find if you're not looking for it. These are some examples of supply chain hacks that had a huge impact. The one that I think is in particular just incredible is MEDOC. We call it also NotPetya. So this was an attack that was launched probably from Russia against the Ukraine, against a company in the Ukraine that does accounting software. And they modified the software. They probably didn't realize this, the hackers, that this software was used by a lot of other companies that did business in the Ukraine. Companies like Maersk, big shipping company, FedEx, some stuff all over the world. So this attack got in and then spread. It spread to Europe, it spread to the United States, it spread to countries in the Middle East as well. And what it did is it destroyed the hard drives of computers, essentially. The master boot record of a hard drive, if you erase it, it's like taking the key out of the car. You can't start it. And some of these companies like Maersk and FedEx have disclosed that in 3 months, they each lost $300 million in lost revenue because their systems were down. They couldn't do business. And so they lost that much money in revenue. From a piece of software that was used by Russians, probably, to attack a Ukrainian accounting company. It goes all the way to Europe and the United States. This is one of the things that worries me a lot, because it means, let's say, terrible situation happens between Pakistan and India. We have a war between them. The first part of that war is going to be on the cyber side of things, because that's what the future holds. And if they start using weapons against each other that have this kind of impact across the globe, all of a sudden they could start something much bigger, something that could impact hospitals like this one did, something that could take down electric grids in the middle of summer. And when that happens, people die, because without air conditioning, the elderly or the very young are very vulnerable. So another lesson is the infrastructure. You have to assume it's insecure. So we used to think years ago with cybersecurity that you would have a strong perimeter, you'd have a firewall, and you would keep the enemy out. That's not how you think anymore. You have to basically think that that wall is just completely open, and the bad people could be inside that wall all the time. So instead, you need to check everybody inside. So it would be like, for example, here at school, I notice some of you have badges, right? So in a zero trust network, which is what this is, everyone here has a badge. And you would not be able to go into any room without other people there checking your badge and making sure you're supposed to be there. That's the same thing with data and with users. Insider threats. Edward Snowden. That's an insider threat. They come in all shapes and sizes. It might be somebody who just does not listen to the training. You tell them, don't click on a link, and they click it. And in some companies, we give people maybe 4 or 5 chances, and if they keep clicking on the links, we take away their internet. No more Facebook, no more YouTube, because they're dangerous. I might spend $1 million a year on cybersecurity, and this one person who doesn't pay attention, right? So, in my view, everyone should have some kind of insider threat program. For example, if you, in a company, you might have an employee that is not doing very well. Everybody knows they're probably going to get fired. It takes time, because you give them many chances to improve, but eventually everybody knows they just don't work. Maybe they're very lazy, whatever it is. When you know that, you should not let that employee have complete access to your network, especially if they're an IT person. That's dangerous. Because when that person knows they're going to be fired, and in my experience, people usually know they're going to be fired before they get fired, the first thing they do, if they're the kind of people that I'm talking about, is start writing down all the passwords, or changing the software and the system so that even after they've been thrown out of the company, they can still get back in, writing back doors for themselves. That happens so much more than you and I would like it to happen. This also means that you want to have a lot of training, and it also is a good reminder that cybersecurity, again, is not about technology, it's about people. So, when you're talking about people, you want to talk about human resources, finance, compliance, all of these parts of a company that have nothing to do with technology. And then you need to know what it is you need to protect. And a lot of companies, and universities as well, we don't know what it is that matters to us. And that also means we don't know what matters to a hacker. So, in many cases, I have clients that have never done what we call a data map. In other words, they've never gone on their system and figured out where their data is, what is there, and often that there's a lot of data that they don't need to have on that system, that doesn't have to be accessible 24 hours a day on the internet. And if it doesn't have to be accessible, you should take it off your network. You should cold storage it. Especially personal information about people. I think people expect that companies will take care of that information, and if you don't need it, Don't leave it there for some hacker to steal it and then make people's lives miserable. These are some of the companies and sectors that are at highest risk these days. And some of them you will look at and you'll say, of course, defense technology, that makes sense, energy, yeah. But what about environmental protection? Green building materials, hybrid cars? Why would that matter? Because that knowledge that those companies have is worth a lot of money to somebody. And if they steal the ideas, they can then go and do the same thing, build the same vehicle, build the same battery, except much more cheaply because they didn't have to spend the money to figure it out. It's called industrial espionage. It's been going on forever and ever. Now it's a lot easier. So, hostile environments, you need to know your neighborhood. And I put the Middle East on here for a very good reason. You are living in one of the most hostile environments for cybersecurity. So let me close with a couple of thoughts, quotes. This is from a German field marshal. And basically the simple version of this is, no plan survives the first contact with the enemy. Now a lot of people say, well, then why do you have a plan? Because the plan helps you to anticipate how badly things are going to go, and that matters. I personally like this version much better. And the reason I like this version better is because every time that I handle a breach for a client for the first time, I think for them it feels like they were punched in the mouth. It's like being robbed. It's like being mugged. It's very personal. It's not a very pleasant thing to happen, and I wish I could give them some sense of how it feels, because maybe they would then help me to keep them on the left side and not the right side. But unfortunately, a lot of people have to wait for the bad things to happen. And then the very closing thought that I want to leave you, just to, again, demonstrate the way hackers think. This goes back to the 2016 Russian hacks. When the Democratic National Congress, the Democratic Party in the US, figured out that someone was hacking them, they hired a very good cybersecurity company to come in and try to fix things. The hackers, who were still inside the system, saw this happen. And they very quickly figured out who that company was. And the next thing they did is they went to the website for this company and they started reading all the stories that this company had posted about how they do their work, so that they would learn how their enemy was thinking. They're good students. You have to give them an A for this. So, all right? So, thank you very much, and I would love to hear some questions, and even better, if you disagree with something I said, I would love to hear that too.
Questions?
Do you have microphones?
So in your line of work, if you can trace the attack to a certain company or a certain location, what would be the next course of action for you or to recommend to your clients?
Very good question. Usually, we will call the law enforcement, the government, if they're not already there working with us, because we have in the United States in particular, we have laws that prevent us from defending actively that way. We're thinking about changing them, but basically, if I were to hack someone back, that's what we call it, hacking back, I'm actually violating some US laws in doing that. And companies are very nervous about violating the law, of course. We are looking at things that maybe would be a step in the middle of doing that. But usually what we do is, if it's a serious enough kind of situation, we already have the FBI or the Secret Service, or in London I've worked with the Metropolitan Police. We bring them in, we show them what's happening, They often have information about the same hack because we're not the only one that are being attacked. And then they will do something about it. Now, what can they do about it? Very little. Because most of the time the hackers are somewhere else and it's very hard to find them. Then you have to convince the government in that country to help you. Sometimes you can. Most of the time you can't. Other times you wait and you hope that the hackers do what some of these hackers will do, and that is they decide to go vacation in Disneyland. And they arrive in Disneyland and they have this wonderful VIP reception waiting for them with, instead of VIP, their letters on the back of their shirts say FBI, and they get arrested and thrown in jail. But when that doesn't happen, they can stay in their country and, I mean, you can figure out who they are usually. There's just not much you can do for now. I hope that this will eventually lead to some changes in international practices so that countries will cooperate more. But I think that's a long way away right now.
More questions?
So you talked about kind of the estimated time that it would take for a security expert to identify and patch a breach versus the actual amount of time it would take. And I was kind of wondering how that would compare to, say, like how long the time would be one of the organizations you've worked at, like one of the governmental organizations. How long would it take, do you think, for one of the organizations you've worked at to find and patch a potential breach?
Much longer. Government is much more complicated and much slower to fix things. One example is one of the worst breaches in the US government is the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. Again, one of these places that most people would not think, why would you protect its personnel information? Well, somebody did, and they stole somewhere around 21 million records of information. And not just names and birth dates, but all the information in these files. And this went on for a very long time. So governments typically react much more slowly, especially a few years ago than they do now. But it still takes a long time. And government computer systems are usually much worse off than private sector. They just don't have the money to keep them up to date. Especially in the United States, the worst we find are the state governments, so the governments in the states or the localities. Those governments have so little money that they usually are running systems that are 5, 10 years old, and they're really, really in bad shape.
So you said that to protect myself against the hacker, I gotta think like him. By thinking like him, I would say that you gotta like encrypt everything that you say or use, or any messages that you want to send. What, in your opinion, what is the most used encryption, and like that I need to know to protect myself against them?
Very good question. And that's something that's actually much easier to do now than it used to be. So 4 or 5 years ago, to do encryption well was very difficult, and even people who knew what they were doing would make little mistakes that would, like with the Germans, would make the whole thing fall apart. Now you have options, especially on mobile phones, for applications like Signal, another one is Wicker, even WhatsApp, that have encryption built into them in a way that works very well. Is it 100%? No. But again, remember what I said, there is no 100% solution. So another thing to think about is, why are you sending that message? Sometimes it's better to call the person. And if you call, don't leave a voicemail message, because you probably know by now, voicemail messages are actually electronic recordings, which can be hacked as well. So sometimes if it's something important that you don't want, that you want to protect, it's better to go and talk to somebody. I also think it's better for humanity if we talk more and do less email, but that's a conversation for another day. But think about why you would send that information or why you would save that information. And for a big organization, that's a very important consideration. We call it data governance, and we want companies to ask, why are you asking on this website for all this information from this person who wants to read your newspaper? Why do you need to know their birth date? Do you need to store them? And if the answer is no, don't do it. Because you're taking responsibility for that data to protect it. And in all likelihood, you're not going to protect it because you're not going to spend the money to do it right. So same thing for a person. If you're going to have a lot of files, say in the cloud, maybe there's some things you shouldn't have there. Maybe it's okay to have them on paper or have them on a USB drive that you lock up. So thinking like a hacker also means thinking about what you need to protect. But encryption, you need to go to theoretical math practically to really be good at it. And so if you love doing that, go. I gave up a long time ago. I just find good people who know it and I use them. So.
I'm going to disagree with you with the point you mentioned. Make it simple as it is. Does this make it simple to the hacker to get your information? Like, for example, if I'm using a simple password or simple information, does it make it like you get a simple start? Why if this person is smart? Maybe he's stupid. He's going to just use simple thing to get to him. Why don't you set this? Because I kind of agree with you and disagree at the same time.
That's a very good question. So what I mean by keep it simple is keep the system that you're using simple. There are some things in there that you're going to have done slightly differently. Passwords, for example, I have mostly given up on passwords, but the way to do a password well is not to make it very complicated, is to make it very long. So when I teach people how to do personal security, the passwords I give them or suggest for them are one word, another word, another word, another word, another word. 30 characters. That is very hard to crack. It's simple. It's simple to remember. If you can't remember that, then come up with the favorite song that you like, and then take the first letter of every word in that song until you get to about 20. That's a good password. Or use a password manager, buy it, that's also very good. But make sure the password to open that password manager is really good. Do you see the okay, good. In the back.
Have more questions?
Hello. What makes the Middle East the most hostile environment for cybersecurity? Would you kindly exemplify on that notion?
Absolutely. And maybe most is not the most accurate way to describe it. I'd say it's very hostile. Because you have the potential for armed conflict always in the Middle East. I mean, you have wars going on. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. What's happening in Syria is a war. And ISIS, Daesh, was very good at using the internet, as most terrorist groups and most armed organizations are. So there's more potential where you have high tensions for there to be cyber conflict than in a place that doesn't have that. And the reason I believe that is because I don't think that anyone is going to engage in any kind of conflict in the future without using some part of the cyber spectrum to accelerate or to do something alongside of a military conflict. It just makes too much sense to bring it all together. So I think India-Pakistan is another place where I worry that it's also very dangerous. North and South Korea. So any place where you have the potential for there to be a war very quickly, I consider to be a place where there's a very high risk of cyber warfare.
Thank you.
Would it be more secure to host your data on the, let's say, Google servers or Amazon web servers? Or is it more secure because it would be managed by people who are specialists in the area of security?
Yeah. Generally speaking, I think the answer to that is yes. But, and this is another thing that all lawyers say, it depends. And what it depends on is how that cloud is configured for you. And AWS, for example, fantastic, but you really need to configure it. And they give you the tools to do it, but very often somebody contracts with Amazon to get the service and they don't do the things that Amazon tells them they should do. And that's usually how they leave their server, their AWS access open. And there have been so many hacks and so many, I wouldn't even call them hacks. I mean, when you can log into a share with, and there's absolutely no password protection on it, that's not really hacking at this point. It's just somebody being very irresponsible. So it is more secure. The infrastructure is also backed up very well, right? So if something goes down, automatically it's available in multiple data centers. If you're hosting your own servers, you know that that's always a problem. If you have to host multiple data centers yourself, that's a lot of money. Very few companies can afford to do that. So I generally think cloud is the best option for almost everybody, but it still needs to be done. It's not like a magical solution. Ah, it's in the cloud, now I'm safe. One more?
First of all, thank you for the nice presentation. My question will be about the education part of the. Based on your experience, do you think that since there's a huge demand now for protecting our data as as you said, like the cloud and the Internet of Things, so everything will be connected to the Internet in the near future, so it means billions of devices will be kind of connected to each other, and hackers are taking advantage of this, so they are learning how to hack in their own way. Mostly they are not learning in universities how to attack. So do you think that universities and colleges and institutions, educational institutes in general, should take part of kind of introducing this cybersecurity field? Now they focus on, for example, just some specific fields like software security, or you find, for example, computer security or data security or whatever. But I haven't seen, at least for myself, a major where they provide, for example, cybersecurity, when they put all these things together in a context of cybersecurity. As you said, considering so many factors, not just one part of the. So do you think that in the near future, this would be maybe, there would be a demand on such certificates, for example, to be like good, or because we need something certified. We need someone who is expert in cybersecurity, but getting it from good kind of research or good. So
yeah,
thank you.
No, it's an excellent question. There are two tracks I see now developing in terms of education and training for people who can go into information security and cybersecurity. One is people who are already in the profession in some way, maybe in IT or security, and they can get a certification through the professional organizations like CISSP or one of those. And that's very good, the training is good, but I think it's still too narrow in some respects. What I'm seeing more, especially in universities in the United States, also in the United Kingdom, some in Germany and France, are developing a curriculum around cybersecurity, sometimes standalone, sometimes integrated in the School of Engineering or Computer Science, but that has other elements that come into it. So for example, a course on the way that human beings think, psychology, is a very helpful thing for that profession to understand, because when someone calls the IT support desk, it's good for that person to understand something about how people think, to have some idea of the questions, how people ask questions. That can be trained, but it's even better when you're doing that at the higher level to have some psychology built into your curriculum. So we do have some 4-year degrees now that are, or sometimes master degrees in cybersecurity. In the US, you have universities like Carnegie Mellon that's been doing things like this, MIT. I tend to think that schools like, especially MIT, that is in many ways the home of the hacker, right, are probably doing the best because they also have a lot of practical opportunities for people to play in this area. One of the things I think is very difficult now, and it wasn't when I was playing around with computers many years ago, is that I was able to do things back then that today probably the police would come and knock on the door. It wasn't considered a bad thing. Nobody really cared. Now, they care. So you don't have the same ability to practice at home, but so you need a place, a safe place, and a university lab, we call them cyber ranges, where you enclose a network so that nothing gets out, and then people play around and learn how to hack. Right? Now, there are some people who say that's terrible. You shouldn't teach people how to do that. I mean, that's ridiculous. You have to teach people how to do that so that you'll have people trained to defend them. There's no way around. Knowledge cannot be contained. We learned that lesson many times, and I'm sure we're going to learn it again over and over.
One last question.
In this region or in the Gulf in general, you have a lot of businesses that are in this situation where they don't care. So in that conversation with a client where they don't see the potential of a data loss being detrimental to their business, and if you get in a conversation about reputation, maybe they'll worry a bit. They don't worry much about financial loss. I mean, if you wanted to have that as a client, probably you don't. But how would you get that idea across that they should be more concerned about security? They should invest in an infrastructure or training?
So I have viewed this, there are people who say that after the first time a company is hacked, they wake up and they see, I have to do something. I actually find that many people treat being hacked the first time as if it was that you were hit by lightning. And most of us, if you are unlucky enough to be hit by lightning, you don't think it's going to happen again in the rest of your life, right? You survive, you feel lucky, you go, right? Well, being hacked is not like being hit by lightning. It may feel like it, but it's more like being in the ocean and you get cut and you start bleeding. That's when the sharks arrive. Because once you've been hacked, first of all, the hackers talk, so they know that that's an easy target, but also it may get in the news. And then you're going to have more problems. So that's not exactly an answer to your question, how do I convince companies to do this? I try not to be scary about this because I don't think it helps. To go in and say, if this happens, you will lose your business, people don't, it's almost like when you go to the doctor and the doctor says, if you don't do this, you're going to have a heart attack. Not many people walk out of there and change their whole life after that, right? It takes a lot of effort. And sometimes they're just people who are not going to listen. So some of it is partially education. Some of it is showing them how their neighbor had a heart attack because they ate the same food they eat and they do the same things they do, right? Look, if it happens to them, it's probably going to happen to you. That sometimes works. But at the end of the day, the client makes the decisions. So, but if you have a different way to suggest doing that, please tell me, because it would be great for my business. So,
Thank you very much. It was a very informative lecture. Great talk. Thank you for the audience. Look forward to next events, the next hackathon. As I said at the beginning, sign up. Places are running out. Thank you.